Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing Shong. Chapter 268. Dokja's Story. Part 5. Arrogant Transcendent, what bullshit. At the beginning of the showdown, Jong-huk moved. The scorn of the constellations and the overwhelming disadvantage in power weren't important to the present Jong-huk. From the moment he entered the third round, he had been focused on only killing the enemies in front of him. An aura spread from Jong-huk, and some of the great constellations in front murmured to themselves. However, most of the constellations still looked down on Jong-huk. No matter how transcendent, he was just a human. The constellations had no reason to lose in a situation where they had an overwhelming advantage in numbers. This became the last thought of the general of Vanera. The exclusive skill, Giant Body Transformation LV6 is activated. Giant Body Transformation was used, and Jong-huk narrowed the distance to the constellations in an instant. Jong-huk shot forward like a meteor. By the time the general of Vanera realized the sword and hurriedly raised his huge double-edged sword, his head was already cut by the black demon sword and flying through the air. You dare! The general of Vanera's eyes widened, and he spoke in his true voice, even with his cut neck. Jong-huk cut the flying head in half using the black demon sword. It was a ridiculous end. The excessively concentrated magic power was melting Jong-huk's blood. It was the result of invoking Transcendence Stage 3 to the limit. The maximum time he could stay in this state was 10 minutes. In these 10 minutes, Jong-huk had to defeat everyone. Next, the death of the general of Vanera was a great shock to the constellations. The constellations didn't disappear with the death of their incarnation bodies. However, there was no one who wanted to lose their incarnation body in vain. A fatal death permanently damaged the constellations. All the constellations became stiff. Jong-huk utilized this short gap to attempt a second attack. The black demon sword left a dark trajectory as it moved and cut off the wings of a giant bird. The thunder-eating bird let out a loud cry. Then the constellations started to move. The founder of humanity's primitive spear aimed at Jong-huk. It was a blow that would have turned any normal incarnation to powder. However, Jong-huk received this blow. The impact ruptured his right forearm muscle, and the force pushed at his entire body. Blood poured from his mouth, but Jong-huk didn't lose focus. Excessive concentration has expanded the category of the attributes. The exclusive attribute Ruler of Amusement is activated. His concentration awakened the power of the character. All the incoming constellations became data and flowed into Jong-huk's mind. At this moment, the world was a game to Jong-huk. Jong-huk avoided the attacks of the constellations with restrained movements and fought back using magic power. Quackak. The founder of humanity screamed as his fingers were cut by the black demon sword. Jong-huk's black demon sword let out a deafening roar as it dug into the gap. Breaking the sky swordsmanship. Destruction skill. Breaking the sky meteor. The sword rose from the ground to the heavens, stabbing the sky like a thunderbolt. The branches of the sword energy hid in the dark clouds and created thunder. The thunder poured from the night sky and struck the constellations like meteorites. Dozens of thunderbolts fell from the sky, and the incarnation bodies of the constellations were pierced. It was a blow containing the power of Transcendence Stage 3. Qua. Jong-huk watched the constellations struggling with the pain and felt himself dying. The experiences of the third round went through his mind. It was a short round. Even so, many things happened. The story one who inherited the name of the king is crying out. As if responding to his feelings, the story's starting speaking. It was as if every story had its own will. Most of them weren't stories he had accumulated alone. The story person who opposes the miracle has begun. A story about returnees. The story Paradise of Despair has begun. A story earned by preserving the abandoned paradise. The story one who fought against an outer god has begun. The story where he confronted the outer god. The story ruler of the industrial complex has begun. It was a story that he would have normally never achieved. It was a story that was unrelated to the current situation, but it was a story related to someone else. It was a story that could never be achieved alone. The stories started talking at the same time. It was as if they didn't want to finish the story here. Along with the bitter pain, blood poured from Jong-huk's chest. He didn't even know how he obtained these wounds. There were a few fallen incarnation bodies on the ground. The supreme god of light, Surya, saw it and spoke. Amazing. You already can't be called a human anymore, child. Jong-huk's stories emitted a bright light, like he was rebelling against the true voice. The story one who hunted the king of disasters is roaring. Jong-huk was a transcendent. The stories were the unique parts making up the constellations. Just having stories didn't mean a person could be equal to the stars in the night sky. Even so, the current light pouring from Jong-huk's body was brighter than any constellation in the place. Jong-huk looked at the stories flowing from his body. Some were known and some were unfamiliar. There was a story that couldn't be obtained again. The story Life and Death Colleagues wants to continue. He couldn't help glancing at Sangha and the other party members. He also saw Kim Dokja on Lee Hyun-sung's back. Jong-huk gripped the black demon sword that was slipping from his hands. He couldn't die. He couldn't die in a place like this. He used the last of his strength to point the trembling sword at Surya. Surya laughed as if the sight was interesting. However, it is only a human story. Surya released a bright light as he used the stories he accumulated over thousands of years. It was a status that couldn't be resisted. Jong-huk's short history was shaking in front of those formidable years. Foolish humans who don't know that a god's power is so high. The sunlight that melted everything poured towards Jong-huk. The scene of the industrial complex being destroyed by the constellations. Incarnations died without being able to rebel. Some people who felt desperate at the sudden disaster appeared up close on the screen. The most horrifying thing was that a man who was covered in injuries and lost one arm was still fighting. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire is furious. The constellation Queen of the Darkest Spring is sorry for the incarnation Jong-huk. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is pointing a finger to the cowardly constellations. Many constellations are complaining about the constellations on the battlefield. There were countless indirect messages from the constellations, and the Dakibi of the Bureau were listening to them. Among them was Bai Hyung, the Dakibi in charge of the Demon King selection. What the hell do you mean by this? He was rarely angry or agitated, but now he had the same mind as the constellations in his channel. The second game is the victory of the Jong-huk Kim Dokja Industrial Complex. There was a time difference, but there is nothing to worry about. Then why not announce the winner? Shortly after the second game, Bai Hyung contacted the Bureau's approval team directly. However, the only answer he got in return was "it is being prepared." In the end, the last connection Bai Hyung had was Baram, the next great Dakibi candidate. There was a crackling sound and Baram's face appeared on the screen. This is the decision of the Bureau. The decision of the Bureau. They were magic words. This is the Bureau's decision. This is the Bureau's decision. Baram. This is the main scenario. There were some things that even the Bureau couldn't touch. Since when did the Bureau interfere with the development of the main scenario? It is also a scenario where a giant story is involved. Baram, don't you know what will happen if you do this? Baram didn't answer. Please tell me. Who the hell did this? Is it one of your superiors? Bai Hyung glanced at Dokja on the screen. It was clear that Dokja was associated with this situation. However, this wasn't something that could be done by one or two senior Dakibis. The silent Baram opened his mouth. Are you doubting the great Dakibis right now? Is there any other streamer who can do this beside them? Bai Hyung, please wake up. Why would they do this? I don't know. Perhaps some bribes were received. Baram frowned. The great Dokibis aren't bound by such private understandings. Then why is this happening? Baram, you must know something. Bai Hyung. Bai Hyung instantly flinched. Baram's voice was furious. Bai Hyung thought there would be a strict scolding, but unexpectedly, Baram just relaxed. It was as if he understood Bai Hyung. Baram on the screen was also watching the scenes of the Demon King selection. Baram's lips slowly opened. Yes, maybe one of the great Dokibis created this delay, as you said. Then. However, even a great Dokibi can only do it up to there. It is impossible for a great Dokibi to endure the storm that will be created from intervening in a scenario of this magnitude. So who did it? At this moment, there was a loud noise, and the ceiling of the bureau shook. It sounded like a huge dragon passing by. It was the sound of probability moving. Bai Hyung's expression hardened. Don't tell me, something so ridiculous, do you understand now? The existence that could move this probability. There was only one such existence in the star stream. He didn't even know if it should be called an existence. Baram drove in the wedge. The will of the star stream wanted this. This is ridiculous. There is no other way to explain it. Bai Hyung's words were taken away, and he stared blankly at the screen. Kim Dokja's party was shown on the screen. Originally, they should be excited about winning. Now they looked terrible as they lay on the ground. It was a confrontation with constellations supported by the nebula. It was a ridiculous fight from the beginning, but the party fought well. They played a game against powerful constellations and finally won the competition that gave them a giant story. Now they were going to be losers just because there wasn't a winner announcement. It was just because the star stream wanted this. Resentment, mixed with anger, filled Bai Hyung's eyes. Then, why does a streamer exist? It was the first time Bai Hyung felt helplessness since becoming a Dokibi. His fingertips trembled as the parts of the scenario he touched fell. If we can't stop this nonsensical development, what are the streamers of this world worth? Bai Hyung. Baram saw Bai Hyung's sad eyes and slowly spoke. Steamers are also part of the story. The desperate Bai Hyung stared at the screen. Jong-huk was gradually melting in the dazzling sunlight. Now the story was leaving the streamer's hand. Thus, there was only one thing to believe in. Many constellations are looking at one constellation. The man on Lee Hyun-sung's back was shaking. On the screen, the man was slowly opening his eyes. Chapter 269. Dokja's Story. Part 6. Bot. Bot. Bat. My cheeks hurt. Bat. There was a bit more pain. I felt something violently shaking in my arms. I opened my eyes at the exact moment the earth let out a tremendous ringing sound. I reflexively raised my head and could see brilliant flashes of light. The sparks of probability in the sky were falling like lightning strikes all over the demon world. Dokja SSI? I woke up the moment I heard Yusenga's voice. Like a disconnected current being reconnected, thoughts started to flow through my head. There were broken incarnation bodies everywhere. No matter how I looked, this wasn't the mythical battlefield. All the fallen bodies were living human beings. The industrial complex being torn apart by the thunder-eating bird could be seen. Did the constellations come? Yusenga, who was about to say something, wiped her bloody cheeks and nodded. Yes. A system message was floating in the air while the party members were in tatters. The winner still hasn't been announced. It was a situation I expected thanks to the last message of Jong-huk in the library. However, I didn't expect the situation to be so serious. Kook. Lee Hyun-sung suffered a serious injury on his side and staggered. I quickly got off Lee Hyun-sung's back and bought a few recovery items from the Dokibi bag. I gave the Great Return pill to Lee Hyun-sung and Yusenga, who were the most seriously injured. Shin Yu-sun had no wounds, but her magic power was depleted, so I gave her an advanced magic power recovery medicine. Trauma medicine was given to Han Myung-go, Breaking the Sky Master, and Jang Hayoung. It cost over 400,000 coins, but now wasn't the time to worry about that. A juicy. Shin Yu-sung drank the potion and looked up at me while leaning against the rock. I looked at Shin Yu-sung for a moment before saying, "You should rest here." By the way. In a distant place, the deafening roar of the constellations was shaking the earth. I could tell the number exceeded 12 just by the status. At this moment, I had an ominous feeling. The constellations were gathered, so how could the party members flee to here? You Jong-huk. None of the party members answered. I looked around the battlefield as an explosion occurred. Everyone except for you Jong-huk was here. In addition, someone was fighting the constellations. The fourth wall is shaking faintly. That stupid bastard. A juicy. No. Shin Yu-sung clung to my waist when I tried to run forward. A juicy will die. You'll die there. She was an always straightforward and brave child. Fear was deeply permeated in the child's eyes. Shin Yu-sung burst into tears as I pulled away from her. In the saturated battlefield, the tears scattered like dust. Perhaps this child had seen it. It was the fear of a giant story that humans could never overcome. Please take care of Yu-sung. I left Shin Yu-sung to Jang Hayoung, who was in a good condition, and activated Way of the Wind. I heard a voice calling out to me from behind but had no time to turn around. I moved forward and the pressure of the status bursting from the center of the battlefield became stronger. It was a fearsome storm of magic that I had never experienced before. The center definitely contained you Jong-huk. Kim Dokja thought, is there a way? The pages of ways of destruction flashed in my head. It isn't possible. That method is too unreasonable. I bit my lips. I predicted that this situation might happen. However, the time passed too quickly and I had been asleep for too long. I was late. Yu Jong-huk was still far away and the wind wasn't on my side. I could buy a new skill from the Dakibi bag, but I can't guarantee its utilization. In the end, I made a decision. I will invest 3 million coins into my strength, physique, agility, and magic power. Your total stats have grown abnormally. The coins you invested have allowed you to cross the stats limit of the scenario. A fuller probability will release some of the stat constraints for this scenario. The growth of the stats value compared to the invested coins will be randomly adjusted. A tremendous amount of sparks jumped from my body. It felt like my muscles were tearing and growing bigger. There was the feeling of my bone density changing and a terrible pain came over me. Cough. I had put it off until now due to the poor cost-to-value ratio, but there was no other way. Your mind can't cope with your evolving incarnation body. The exclusive skill Fourth Wall is activated. Your incarnation body is evolving to a new level. Since the early scenarios, the overall stats didn't have a big influence on combat. It was because stories, stigmas, and skills had much more influence. In addition, since the number of coins per level after level 100 was exponentially larger, it was more advantageous to buy a skill using the same amount of coins. Now the situation was different. All your stats have exceeded 200. Your incarnation body can handle a bigger status. I needed a strong body, not a powerful skill. Your agility has reduced the air resistance. Magic power is opening up the blocked bloodstream. A huge amount of coins was transforming my incarnation body. Your strength is causing an explosive change. The frequency of my footsteps and the speed at which the landscape passed in my vision changed drastically. Yu Jong-huk. Of course, it was impossible to surpass the constellations or transcendence. Still, it was enough to confront them for a while. Many constellations are envying your incarnation body. I crossed the wilderness at a tremendous speed and the center of the battlefield finally entered my eyes. At the center, I could see a dying person. You idiot! What are you doing? In front of Surya's radiant light, Yu Jong-huk was dying. I didn't know where his left arm had gone and steam was rising from his charred body. Even so, Yu Jong-huk was gripping the black demon sword without moving an inch. Jong-huk's head moved slowly towards me. His voice wasn't heard, as if he had no strength to open his lips. The fourth wall is greatly shaken. The words of the mass production maker came to mind. The constellations were also just part of this great story. They were also lonely and had to do these things. Bullshit. Get lost. The founder of humanity stood in front of me and wielded the primitive spear. The exclusive skill Electrification LV12+2 has been activated. White lightning exploded from my fist and the battlefield filled with a blue light. Quackhack. The confused constellations supported the thrown-back Manu and raised their status. The magic power poured towards me like a tsunami. My strengthened body withstood the mighty power of the constellations. The flesh of my fist cracked and blood flowed down, but it was still bearable. The constellations blinked as the dust settled down. They didn't know I had this much power and were shocked. Stop him. A blue-white energy flew towards the constellations. In an instant, there were abrasions on my back and thighs as well as a long stab in my side. Jong-huk. My cry didn't reach him properly. Jong-huk had fallen to his knees and his life was now flickering. No magic power could be felt from him. Jong-huk was dying. I held my breath and then shouted with the greatest true voice possible. Asmodeus. The true voice burst out and the constellations blocked their ears for a moment. The great constellations couldn't stop and tears poured from my eyes. I shouted again. If you are a demon king, keep your promise. The situation was so big that I didn't expect much. He was a shrewd guy and should know how dangerous it was to take my side right now. However, it was Asmodeus. As if waiting, one star in the sky flashed. There was a storm coming in and something was descending. The demon king of lust and fury has appeared in this world. A tremendous probability was flowing and a colossal presence was manifesting before my eyes as an incarnation body. A little girl surrounded by a dark aura raised her head. It was the king of the demon world who immediately subdued the transcendent Jong-huk. Later, he would join one of the worst organizations in the world, the Seekers of the End. Demon King. The 32nd Demon King, Asmodeus started running wild. Ahahahahot. He laughed and a huge rake appeared at the fingers of the Demon King. Asmodeus' bloody grip scraped through the area and tore at the constellations. Quack. The Mad Demon King. What the hell is this? The constellations turned their gaze towards me and I triggered Way of the Wind to snatch Jong-huk. Chase him. The constellations started running, but my strengthened incarnation body was a bit faster than them. I ran with all my strength while carrying Jong-huk on my shoulder. Wake up please. Jong-huk was barely breathing. The weight of his body was lighter than usual. He had suffered such severe pain that even the skeleton of his body seemed changed. I listened to his gradually fading heartbeat and cried out, "Hey, don't mess around. You can recover. Do something." However, Jong-huk didn't move. I called out to Bayu and bought a few more great return pills. My left hand supported his body while my right hand poured the pills into Jong-huk's mouth. No effect was visible. He didn't have the strength to swallow it. His breathing slowed and became distant. The tips of Jong-huk's toes were breaking and his body was disappearing. I used Way of the Wind to wrap around the debris and prevent them from escaping. Even so, I couldn't prevent the dim light from emerging from his heart. I was well aware of this phenomenon. I had read the scene a few hundred times and had to know what it was. Jong-huk had a thought. Don't think about it. This life ends here. Damn it. Don't think about it. Story fragments were falling from Jong-huk's cheeks. I was scared of this story and slapped his cheek before crying out to the air. Shit. Don't go back. You jerk, leave him alone. The sponsor of incarnation, Jong-huk, is looking at you. You can still survive. This round isn't over. You can fight back against this guy. I can save you. Jong-huk's sponsor was silent. This guy always did the same thing. He watched Jong-huk suffering from death. He placed the soul of a hopelessly broken man back into the world line of the past. The stigma regression LV3 has been activated. It was cruel. Was this really how it ended? How did I get here? Would Jong-huk really die here? Then a single line emerged. Incarnation Jong-huk is looking at his sponsor. Jong-huk? Jong-huk, who became so ragged that his shape couldn't be recognized, stared at his sponsor with a single bloody eye. Sparks appeared around his disappearing body. Incarnation Jong-huk is resisting his sponsor. All of the stories of incarnation Jong-huk is resisting death. This was something I had never seen in any round. The incarnation Jong-huk has refused to regress. Chapter 270. Dokja's Story. Part 7. Jong-huk's entire body was trembling. I can't die. I will never die here. Jong-huk's desperate will was being conveyed through Omniscient reader's viewpoint. Hey, you. This Jong-huk refused to regress. The sponsor of incarnation Jong-huk is looking at his incarnation. Jong-huk's sponsor was silent as this situation occurred for the first time. It was a mysterious silence. It seemed to be both angry and sad. Or perhaps there was no response. Not long after that, the gaze on Jong-huk disappeared. The stigma regression LV3 has been cancelled. Crazy, something like this was possible. The light of the stigma disappeared and Jong-huk once again sagged down. His barely opened eyes closed and his mouth was mumbling something. I felt his desperate will to live. It was Jong-huk's unique commitment to somehow survive. Jong-huk's thoughts were heard in my head. Break it down. So I can eat. I pulled out another great return pill, turned it to powder and poured it into his mouth. The stories of the fallen man slowly stopped collapsing. It's fine. Jong-huk was betting everything into this round. He decided to forsake the premise that it was okay to fail a few times and to remain in this world. Perhaps he had lost consciousness, but Jong-huk didn't say anything else. Instead, the stories wrapped around Jong-huk's body shone brightly. The story Life and Death Companions wants to continue. Life and Death Companions. It was a story that didn't exist for Jong-huk in the original novel. What is your relationship with Jong-huk? We are life and death companions. It was at Chungmuro. It was clearly the conversation I had with Gong Pildu. I couldn't help laughing. Now we would really live together or die together. I ran while holding on tightly to Jong-huk. My party members shouting in the distance could be seen. I felt a hot heat behind me. Together with a fierce wind, fireballs narrowly brushed over my head. The chasing constellations were already right behind me. Did you call the Demon King? Do you know what you have done? The constellations roared as a formidable aura poured towards me. Stupid bastard. Now the 73rd demon realm will perish. I shouted at Li Hyunsung in front of me instead of replying to them. Li Hyunsung SSI. Jong-huk's body flew through the air and Li Hyunsung caught him. At the same time, I turned around and reflexively punched out. A running constellation collided with me and screamed. Electrification struck the tail of the scorpion goddess and then unbroken faith slashed at the thunder-eating bird. The blade of faith absorbed power and shone brightly. Blood splashed and I unleashed with all the power of electrification. The number of constellations that followed me was 7. It was a number I couldn't afford by myself. The bigger problem was that the dark clouds in the air were thickening. Dark clouds flocked like a sinister omen and the stars shining towards the 73rd demon realm disappeared one by one. In fact, this was why I didn't call Asmodeus until now. A series of dark lightning fell from the sky and the frightened constellations jumped back. Sparks flew in the air and the demon kings descended. Now that Asmodeus was here, nothing was holding back the other demon kings. Unfortunately, the Demon Kings weren't on my side. The Demon King, maker of discord, has appeared in the demon world. The Demon King, monarch who is a philosopher about corpses, has appeared in the demon world. The summoning of the incarnation bodies alone seemed to surpass the other constellations. Now there was no one who could help me. The 73rd demon realm is responding to your story. The only thing I could believe in was the stories I had built. Everybody, step back. Maintain your strength as much as possible while I buy time. Then one of the party members went wild. There was a roaring sound from my side. Department head Nim? What? Han Myung-go activated one-legged swift runner and started running somewhere at a tremendous speed. It was the direction I came from. It was the place that contained Demon King Asmodeus. Ahahahahot. Demon King Asmodeus laughed cheerfully. Arrows of light struck all over his body and blood flowed from his torn arm. However, only feelings of pleasure and joy could be seen on the face of the little girl. I'm happy. This is fun. Many constellations lost their incarnation bodies due to the bloody grip. However, there were still many constellations remaining. The Demon Kings were basically existences equal to narrative-grade constellations. Normal constellations were unknown, but there was no chance for Asmodeus to win against one of the Locapula, Surya. Surya opened his mouth like he couldn't understand. I wonder why, Demon King of Lust and Fury. There was the sound of a giant drum bursting in the distance. Perhaps the constellations chasing the Demon King of Salvation were having the final showdown. Surya couldn't understand it. Why were these humans still resisting? Why was a Demon King taking sides with a human? Asmodeus smiled like he was slightly exhausted. Surya raised his left hand and the attacks of the constellations ceased. Asmodeus, why are you siding with trivial humans? Siding? I'm not siding with anyone. Asmodeus grinned while licking the blood on his hands. It just seems fun. Fun? You don't know. What is the story of the Demon King of Salvation? I also saw it. It is a common story. Asmodeus made a big fuss at the words. Ha 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 ha. Surya. You must have lost your eyes from all the light pouring out. I told you before. If you want to enjoy the stories for a long time, take good care of your eyesight. I admit that the child is a good one among the new stars. However, it is a normal level in the star stream. He doesn't yet have a myth-level story. Surya frowned as his status spread out. Asmodeus was still laughing. A myth-level story, you have lived for a long time, but you are still judging the stories by that. It is only human history. No evaluation is needed. All stories eventually depart from history. Asmodeus, you played around in the Gourmet Association and now you're saying this. Then do you want to keep going? You will eventually lose your incarnation body. Well, I suppose. But before that, the constellation was narrowing the distance one step at a time and Asmodeus suddenly opened his mouth. By the way, Surya, why are you obsessed with the Demon King of Salvation? Obsessed? What do you mean? It isn't just you, but the nebulae. Isn't that right? It seems you are the one who is blind. At best, it is human history as you said. Yet you and Vedas keep trying to recruit the Demon King of Salvation. You failed and now you're trying to kill him. This isn't exactly like a giant nebula. At this point, I want to ask something. Why are you doing this? Surya had no words for a moment. There was a subtle emotion on his face. Surya hurriedly raised his right hand as if to hide his feelings. It was a sign for the constellations to attack. At this moment, Asmodeus said, wait, ahaha, ha ha ha. I see. Surya. You. I heard about what happened at the Gourmet Association. Surya's raised hand stopped. The Demon King of Salvation is pursuing the last scenario. That's why you hate him. Right? Surya's fingers trembled, showing his agitation. Asmodeus scoffed at the shaking. It is because you can't get the qualification of the end. A spear of light pierced Asmodeus' body. Asmodeus' lips held a deep ridicule as he was constantly pierced by spears of light. Blood dripped down. The urgently implemented incarnation body was much weaker than usual. Asmodeus held the intestines that were flowing from his torn skin. The human body is really uncomfortable. Asmodeus ignored the incoming constellations and looked up at the sky. Stars could be seen through the dark cloud. The light and darkness in the sky were competing against each other. The strong existences surrounding the 73rd demon realm were moving. Asmodeus had lived for a long time, but he hadn't seen something like this before. Today, something tremendous was happening in the demon world. Surya's spear of light moved, and the constellations poured magic power towards Asmodeus. The moment that Asmodeus' incarnation body was going to die. Do. A cloud of dust obscured the view of the constellation. The astonished constellations paused for a moment, and someone embraced Asmodeus' small body. Even Asmodeus was surprised this time. He had lived for many years, but had never been saved by anyone. You. Han Myungo was running while carrying him. One arm and a part of Han Myungo's left arm had disappeared from the constellation's attacks. Asmodeus muttered with a bemused expression. Why? He knew the identity of this person, but Asmodeus couldn't understand why this person came here. Han Myungo might be a member of his household, but this loyalty. Han Myungo strongly hugged Asmodeus without answering. A blind and big heart could be felt. The emotions weren't directed at Asmodeus. Asmodeus smiled as he was held in Han Myungo's arms. Really, this scenario is truly interesting. I'm sorry everyone. I think you have to come with me. The moment Kim Dokja said this, Lee Hyun-sung was the first to stand up. I was waiting. Yu Sanga and the Breaking the Sky Master followed while the frightened Shin Yu-sung clenched her fists. OSU, who was the size of a guinea pig, barked. It was a humbling power, but they were determined. Humans didn't back down in front of the status of the constellations. There was an explosion and the battle began. One blow broke bones, 2 blows caused a deep wound, and 3 blows couldn't guarantee their life. The Demon Kings were making things more and more chaotic. The Demon Kings flew through the air like released strings. Kuhik. It was Lee Hyun-sung who flopped down first. The Chimera Dragon screamed as its wings were broken. Jang Hayoung sat down and watched all of it. Jang Hayoung was overcome by overwhelming helplessness and couldn't move. The Breaking the Sky swordsmanship that Jang Hayoung learned was too weak. The techniques he learned through the wall weren't enough to deal with the constellations. Jang Hayoung held the place that was hit by the Demon King and gazed at the fighting Kim Dokja. The Demon King of Salvation he had long wanted to meet was struggling. His ribs and right arm were broken. Jang Hayoung wanted to fight together. Only the stars in the sky were shining without mercy. There were so many stars, so why wasn't anyone helping them? The exclusive skill Unidentified Wall is activated. In fact, he had done it many times already. He sent messages several times to the modifiers Kim Dokja mentioned, but there was no reply. Nevertheless, Jang Hayoung kept sending unanswered prayers to the constellations. Please just one person. The Unidentified Wall asks, do you really want to help? The wall was slightly vibrating. The Unidentified Wall asks, do you really want to help? He nodded. I want to help. I can accept any price. Please. The next moment, numerous messages appeared in front of Jang Hayoung's eyes. Hello. Do you perhaps know Kim Dokja? He is looking for constellations. Hello Constellation. You don't know me, but I have to ask a favor, if Kim Dokja. Constellation, please help me. Kim Dokja is in danger. Please help. Please. Jang Hayoung read the hundreds of messages that surfaced in front of him with a blank expression. They were all messages from himself. There are currently 124 messages waiting to be sent. To be exact, they were messages he thought he had sent. WY. Goosebumps covered his entire body. It was the reason why a reply didn't come from numerous constellations. The unidentified wall said, "I was told not to send it." Who? The unidentified wall says, "It is an existence higher than me." He didn't know who it was. However, Jang Hayoung could see what he had to do now. Send them. Right now. Send all of them. The unidentified wall was silent for a moment. The unidentified wall is sighing. Don't regret it. The next moment, his head was going to burst from the pain. 124 messages have been sent. Like water being discharged from a dam, numerous messages were released from Jang Hayoung and flew through the sky. Time passed. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Jang Hayoung stared up at the sky without releasing the string of hope. The constellation One-Eyed Mithraea has entered the channel. Then somebody answered. Similar to a meteor shower, the sound of people entering the channel didn't stop. The constellation Brash Swamp Predator has entered the channel. The constellation Coaeil Pill has entered the channel. The constellation First Spiritualist of Joseon has entered the channel. The constellation Goryo's First Sword has entered the channel. The constellation of a small planet has entered the channel. The distorted balance of the sky changed, and Jang Hayoung listened to all the messages with joy and despair. The constellation Secretive Plotter has entered the channel. Chapter 271. Dokja's Story. Part 8. I raised my head at the entrance of the constellations. The constellations who favor you are looking at you. All of them were constellations who had once sided with me. The constellation Coaeil Pill is looking at you. The constellation First Spiritualist of Joseon is looking at you. Among them were constellations of Earth. The constellation Goryo's First Sword is looking at you. There was also Cheok Junyeong, who I couldn't contact for a while. However, there was an even more welcome existence. The constellation Secretive Plotter is looking at you. Secretive Plotter. I didn't know his exact identity. All I knew was that he favored me and watched my scenarios. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is clasping both hands together gently. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is forming fists. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is grunting and looking at you. All 4 of my early constellations had now gathered. Your story is being created in the 73rd Demon Realm. All the gazes poured towards me, and I felt like I had returned to the beginning of the story. Surya spoke. Child, I know your expectations, but they won't help you. The constellations are clever and won't make foolish choices like you humans. I saw my colleagues who were barely standing. My colleagues were centered around the fallen Jong-huk. Surya laughed. None of them will want to be the enemy of a nebula. As soon as he spoke, an earthquake occurred between Surya and I. The ground quickly became damp and turned into a sticky swamp. In the swamp where I would be sucked in if I took a step, someone was waking up. I immediately noticed who it was. The constellation Brash Swamp Predator has appeared in the demon world. The Brash Swamp Predator. He was a constellation of the Gourmet Association. He had fallen into debt and was dragged away by the executive branch. It was a lizard that was over 30 meters. The ancient lizard that awakened from the swamp let out a resounding roar. The Breaking the Sky Master recognized the Brash Swamp Predator and growled. If I was right, this time he wasn't my enemy. I smiled and asked, "Have you come to pay off your debts?" In the past, the mass production maker had advised me, "Don't make too many enemies." I could have paid them back if you hadn't helped me. The giant lizard turned his head and showed hostility towards the constellations. I don't like them very much. That's why I came. The giant lizard finished the short conversation and rushed to the constellations. The constellations shouted at the monster who was running towards them. The Brash Swamp Predator was a narrative-grade constellation. He was scary when he was an enemy, but I couldn't feel reassured now that he was on the same side. The angry Surya cried out. Lackey of the Gourmet Association, aren't you afraid of the nebula? Nebula? Ha 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 ha. Since when has the Gourmet Association cared for such a thing? Many members of the Gourmet Association were heretics of the star stream. They were those who practiced their will, regardless of whether they belonged to a nebula or not. The brash swamp predator wasn't part of a nebula and was one of the most free-spirited in the Gourmet Association. Quack. The giant lizard swung his tail and the surface of the ground split apart while fragments shot up. The thunder-eating bird and mysterious bird of the Nile rushed towards him. The huge monsters started to fight and the surroundings quickly became a mess. In the center of the mess, Surya rose to the sky and looked down at me. One garbage doesn't change the result. Surya's light flooded towards me. It wasn't easy to avoid even if I used Way of the Wind and electrification. I couldn't contend with a low capilla, but I didn't give up. My skin was torn and my bones were exposed. In the middle of this pain, I somehow tried to buy time. My nerves were focused on the system message in the air. The winner of the second game will soon be announced. The winner of the game was decided. No matter how strong the presence that delayed the scenario, there was a limit. In other words, I only needed to buy time and we would win this game. Child, it won't work out as you wish. I could feel a lot of probability moving. It was a probability originally not allowed for this scenario. The probability offered by Vedas was moving. The balance in the sky changed and the scales of probability were leaning. Vedas will has come here. A bright sun shone behind Surya. Sweat flowed as my body felt like it was melting. 1, 2, 3, 4, the light sources burnt the ground. I was unable to look at Surya since I would be blinded, so I focused on his shadow. The story King of the 12 Suns is shining. This was Surya of Vedas. He was a king who united the 12 sun gods. Do you see the difference in status now? My exhausted party members fell down and groaned. The brash swamp predator struggled painfully and the only constellations looked up at Surya with awe. Surya was powerful, but he became even more powerful when the destruction scenario of Vedas ended. Surya, the sun god who absorbed all the power of Vivasvadan Savitar, became a monster who turned the earth of the 265th round of Ways of Survival into a hell of fire. Still, no matter how strong the enemy, I had to struggle. The stigma song of the sword LV3 has been used. Your sword is filled with the words left by the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare. In the night, a god appeared in his dream and said, "You will win big if you do this. Otherwise, you will lose." It was a verse I heard when dealing with the lesser dragon. It is the stigma of a great constellation. You are using a petty trick. Thanks to the effect of the skill, it was like I wore sunglasses and could see the light source in front of me. As I recalled, this verse had the effect of telling the enemy's weakness through color. The green showed the strong areas and the red showed the weak areas. I stared at Surya with my eyes wide open. I stared and stared again. Cold sweat flowed down my back. Yes, what are you seeing? The smiling Surya was slowly approaching me. You can keep stealing stigmas. You might have risen to become a constellation, but you were born human. Surya's whole body was green. I couldn't see any weaknesses. A human history can't transcend a god. There is no such thing in the star stream. I couldn't deal with Surya alone. It was impossible even with the brash swamp predator's help. I threw my torn coat and spoke. The balance of probability is tilted. This means I can put more weights on it. The balance won't tilt, no matter how comes. My story wasn't a myth. I wasn't a god or a hero. My story might be a common one in the star stream. The constellations in the night sky are making a decision. Even so, someone in this world was listening intently to my story. That remains to be seen. Come, Goryo's first sword. There were explosive sparks and a meteor fell through the dark clouds. The constellation Goryo's first sword is responding to your call. A spectacular sword energy tore through the sky. It was the three-sword style I had previously seen. Who called me, Jang Hayoung? The sword struck like a thunderbolt and deeply wounded one of Surya's sons. Along with the blinding explosion, Surya's voice was heard. A trivial great-grade constellation dares. A hot flash flooded towards the ground and something thumped against the ground, sending me and my colleagues back. Once I came to my senses, I was in the arms of a man. In terms of size, he was no smaller than the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. It has been a long time, descendant. The magnificent sight of Goryeo first sword was in front of me. It's been a long time, old man. Your status has changed. The great grade Jang Hayoung was now narrative grade. It is all thanks to you. Several things happened. I had expected it. Jang Hayoung had joined in the fight against the outer god. He would have gained a powerful story and risen to a higher level. The debt can finally be repaid. Jang Hayoung stared up at the sky and the indirect messages of the constellations followed. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is murmuring to himself in anger. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is started gloomily. Perhaps the other constellations also wanted to come here. However, there were constraints on probability and they couldn't move in front of the nebula's eyes. In particular, Oriel belonged to Eden and the problem was more complicated. If she did something wrong, a great war between good and evil might occur. I wasn't disappointed despite not receiving help from Oriel. It's coming. Surya's beams of light were coming in waves. I knew that the gods on the Indian side don't play around, but they are truly monsters. Jang Hayoung protected me and cut down the waves of light. However, Jang Hayoung's blade was slightly corroded. I might be able to cut the great mountain and the sea, but I haven't cut the sun yet. If I knew there was such a monster, I would have brought Yi. Yi was probably the sun hunter in Chinese mythology. He seemed to be an acquaintance of Jang Hayoung. Even so, Yi wouldn't be able to deal with Surya, a constellation with the constitution of an emperor. I'll deal with you. The founder of humanity rushed towards Jang Hayoung. The great men fought and the surrounding area was devastated by the sword energy. The 73rd demon realm is snooping around your story. Then something flowed from my chest up towards the sky. They were the sentences I obtained from the last game. Surya shouted with a thunderous voice. What are you doing? There is no time left. Kill them quickly. These sentences were materials that made up the giant story. Finally, the giant story of this world started to fluctuate. The Demon King, maker of discord, is showing hostility towards you. The passive Demon Kings finally started moving. The heat sent from the maker of discord blew me through the air and I felt the pain of my entire body tearing apart. I had 2 allies, but the battlefield was outrageously disadvantageous. The Demon Kings released their strength and the scales of probability once again creaked. I needed the help of more people, but who could deal with these powerful Demon Kings? I thought hard but couldn't figure out a constellation who would help. Suddenly, the approaching Demon King slowed down. Fire with full force. There was the sound of cannon fire along with a familiar girl's voice. Ajusi. It's me. The constellation Maritime War God is looking at you. I'm sorry I'm late. On the moat in a distant part of the industrial complex, Li Jihai's ghost fleet was firing towards this side. The indirect messages of the angry Demon Kings filled the air. 2 Demon Kings turned towards Li Jihai. Jihai. It was good that she came to help, but it was unreasonable with only Li Jihai. Her opponents were 2 Demon Kings. If she did something reckless, she would be killed immediately. Run away. I quickly moved, but it wasn't easy due to all the injuries I had suffered. The Demon Kings were entering Li Jihai's vicinity. This couldn't continue. This, if I used Way of the Wind. Then someone grabbed my shoulder. Dokja SSI, doing things alone again. I told you not to be like this. Was it because I had been burnt by Surya's light for too long? I couldn't see the woman's face properly. However, I knew who she was from her voice alone. I'm late because I lost the coin toss. Don't be too upset. The woman walked towards the Demon Kings. Wait a minute. Hwan SSI. Young Hwan was strong. She probably became stronger after doing the personal scenarios. Nevertheless, it was too unreasonable for her to deal with a Demon King. Even if she used judgment time against the Demon King. I know what you're thinking, but don't worry. Was I mistaken? Angelic wings seemed to overlap on her back. It is because I'm not fighting. It was a huge status I had never felt before. The Demon King rushing towards Lee Jai-hai looked over with an astonished expression. The power of the constellation descended towards Young Hee-won, covering the entire demon world and turning it silver for a moment. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire has appeared in the 73rd demon realm.